Reilly, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Thanks for coming down, man.
Yeah, no worries.
I really appreciate it. This is ahead of schedule, out of left field. So I was really, really stoked to see your email come through, and I thought I'm just going to call this person straight away. It was so funny that when I called you, you were listening, doing your homework on the Scotness podcast at the same time.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You've got a lot to say, and I just watched your film, but let's talk about why you're here.
Yeah. Basically, shot a film.
Yep.
And it's playing at Melbourne Doc Fest on Tuesday, the 30th of June, so very soon.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just wanted to have a chat about it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now, the reason you and I sort of found each other is through Scotness and Anthony and Julia Sharp, right?
Yep.
And we were talking about this yesterday. Just so interesting. Once you start sort of vocalizing whatever it is that you're working on, how little things will sort of appear out of the ether, and I know this person who's doing this. You should speak to this person, and that sort of exists in the realm of really good people too, right? Do you know what I mean? That some people go, cool. So, anyways, back to me. Whatever it is that I'm doing, and Anthony and Julie are incredible like that, and I was so stoked to meet Scotness as well. That was such a great chat, and I just watched your film. Like, it's incredible. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I really, really liked about it, it's called The Last Extinction, right?
Yes.
Yep. I was just explaining to you how terrible I am with titles and names before.
Well done.
Yes, got it. I've got heaps of questions backing up in my head right now that I want to unpack about this. First things first, what's your involvement with the film? And did you go over to shoot it? Give me the sort of backstory on your involvement.
How did it all happen?
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I was just kind of doing research into the subject. I was interested in it, and then I just read on some article somewhere that 150 species are going extinct every 24 hours.
So that was the nugget of fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe that we weren't talking
Staggering.
about it. Yeah. And I think these days it's closer to 200 plant and animal species going extinct every 24 hours. And it was just before, it was probably a year before Greta Thunberg put out her video about it. And so just no one seemed to be talking about it. We have, a lot of issues in the world, and a lot of people were talking about, climate crisis at that point. And so I was like, I just wanted to open up the conversation and get people talking about it. So I started researching and started putting a script together. So that's how it kind of happened. The Africa part, I was looking into where I was going to place a film, originally being from Australia. I thought maybe in Australia. And then I found a program through Africa Media where they brought filmmakers over and helped develop your own film. And I thought that was just perfect. It fit in exactly. Africa's a fantastic place for it's such a vast
diverse ecosystem. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And lots of biodiversity. So I just thought that was the perfect place, and it wasn't until I got to Africa that the film really started making its own personality,
And so you got a grant from them. Is that what you're saying? You applied to, and then they.
Yeah, it's not so much a grant, like I funded it myself.
Okay,
I went over.
Right.
But there's like a mentorship program,
Okay.
and so you're working with really professionals in their field
Who are on the ground there, who have lived there, and
they're just making there's a whole team. So there's people, filmmakers, but then they've also got researchers and photographers and heaps of people who just live and breathe, wildlife, and yeah.
So, and when did you go out and make it?
Last year, so 2019.
So you said, from the idea being coming in was 2015, did you say?
Oh, yeah, the idea probably 2 years before that, 2017.
So worked on the script. How do you write a documentary script?
Yeah.
Have you done that before?
I've made a couple of small documentaries, but this is definitely my biggest and the biggest budget. It was. I had a kind of rough idea of what I wanted to say, but similar to what you've been talking about previously in your podcast, I felt like it was very preachy, and
Right.
who's my audience? Do I want to just be telling people who already know the issues and just making everyone upset?
It's 100%. It's you can really stop a piece of the pie, a portion of the audience from coming on board if you don't present it the right way, or it is just too fucking full on, because they just don't want to know, and they know it's there, but they just don't, and they'll never watch it because of that. Like I've talked about this before, but we saw The Cove advertised there the other day. Now that broke my heart to watch that, but I would watch it again. But my wife, who is a 20-year vegan, won't watch it. So she doesn't really know what's happening. I mean,
it's too upsetting.
So, and that's really interesting to see that was a premeditated move on your part, because watching it, you have definitely found that balance of giving you the stuff that might incite action, but at the same time packaging it in a way that you don't want to turn it off. Yeah, not because it's like a car crash. It's quite the opposite. You're just in love with what you're seeing.
So when I got to Africa, that was a big issue that I had with my script. And then I got to work with George Kokinis, who is just a fantastic wildlife documentary filmmaker, and he really helped me evolve the script so that it's more about you find the stories of the animals and what we can relate to as well, because we're all animals.
Yeah.
And then tie in bits of knowledge and information through that. So entertainment first, and then if you're entertaining people, they're going to absorb what you want to say.
Right, 100%. It's interesting they say about music writing and songwriting that you can lose rhythm in the high notes, but if you lose rhythm in the bass, cognitively we will disconnect to the song and it's a shit song. So you can have shit lyrics and you can have someone who's missing their marks in the high notes, but if it's got a great bass line, you'll still be brought in. And so I feel like there's an interesting parallel there between the two. Because that's you watch a documentary, right, and you think, how the fuck did they get these shots, and how am I, like, a really good one, you're really engaged, and like because that's something I noticed about yours, which was really great as well, was the editing, how you were, to jump to follow the story between the animals, and like even the moment where you had the hippo who makes that little noise. When he turns to the right, that's perfect. And I'm like, did they catch that? And then I'm thinking, how the fuck do you get sound from such far away? Like, it's quite the thing.
Yeah.
So, tell me about the filming of it.
Yeah, I tried to make it a bit comical
You need that.
in a little way. Yeah.
You don't want to slit your wrists at the end of it, You want to be like emotionally engaged with a little laughs, but also, fuck, something has to change.
No, hippos are the most dangerous animals, I think, on the planet.
That's
I think
what
they
I've heard.
kill the most human beings.
Yeah.
So we definitely weren't allowed anywhere near the hippos. So we filmed everything. 95% of the film, I think, was filmed from a safari vehicle with a guide. So we didn't get any sound because you can just hear the engine the whole time of the safari
So how
vehicle.
do you do it?
It was just all done in post-production. Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Isn't that so? That's what I felt, because you can tell that you're shooting from a long way away. But not every documentary has been done in that way, right? Like they must be up and close and personal and catching real sounds, or was it really done?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. A lot of
fuck.
it. Yeah.
I remember I used to work as a portrait photographer in Banff in the Rockies in Canada, and the guy who I worked for was a great wildlife photographer, and he had this one shot of a close-up of a puma. And everyone talked about how impossible it was to see them and what have you, although they were fucking apparently everywhere. And if you ever saw one, it would be the last thing you saw. And I said to him one day, I said, how the fuck did you... No, I said to his boss, how did he get that shot? And she was like, it's at the zoo. I was like, oh, man.
Yeah.
Devastated, but also, it makes sense. It's still a puma. Yeah.
No, none of the animals were filmed in the zoo. They were. I can confirm. But yeah, there's a lot of, I think a lot of the things that happened in my film were organic. Like there's a shot of like a crocodile who was, trying to, or he was just stalking a duckling.
Yeah.
So that all happened. But there's, we would just be out filming. I think we ended up filming for maybe 9 days or about a week, every day for just hours and hours. So we just had like hard drives full of footage of like lions, for example, sleep all day. Yeah, they don't do anything. So we've just got all this footage of lions sleeping, and you're just kind of hoping something's going to happen. Yeah.
Well, isn't that quite interesting? Because you would have to think that 90% of the footage that the world has seen of lions has been in the day. And you're like, shit. Now, if you apply that sort of mathematics to it, fuck, those dudes must have been sitting around for ages.
Long time. Yeah, and it's interesting, talking to George, who I mentioned before, who has done some incredible wildlife documentaries. He really speaks about how... I lost my train of thought. Oh, no.
We'll come back.
Oh, how, in the past there was a lot of ethical issues around that. Like sometimes they would place, say, a deer or something near a lion who they knew were really hungry.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff doesn't happen anymore, but a lot of the older documentaries, and there's a lot of ethical questions around that, whether, are you doing the lion a favour? They were starving, they needed food, or are you kind of disrupting the wildlife?
Their natural, predatory instincts and what have you. That's... So that ties into something that I thought was really, really fascinating, especially once you get into the more sensitive audience who doesn't want to watch, a lion kill a gazelle or what have you. That the reality of if that were to slow down, what would happen on the far side is just as devastating. So you must have balance amongst the whole thing, and both are as important. And whether it be that the eating of grass is way less vicious than the eating of another animal, they're both so essential. Because like I say, like Erica hates watching that stuff and won't engage with it. Yet I'm like, but that's part of the deal. That's. It's majestic and it's incredible, and I feel like I don't actually feel that bad for the antelope, because lions are amazing, But I think what's unique about, because this must be something that you encountered as well, is what's my unique story here? There's been a bajillion movies and documentaries made of lions on the hunt and hippos doing their thing, but what was unique? Like, I had no idea about the importance of hippopotamus feces and that they went into the river to do their biz, and how important that was. Like, that to me was like, wow, this makes this unique. I haven't heard about this side of it. It's not as glamorous to talk about, I guess. I don't know.
And that's really the heart of the documentary, that it's about the interconnectedness of nature and how there are certain animals who you think like, even like, an elephant, you kind of think like, oh, it'll be really sad if we lose elephants, but really, are they playing that much part in the world? We admire them, but, are they really,
Just bring it to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they really playing that much part? And you can see in the film that if you just take away one animal, it really disrupts the entire connectedness of nature.
That was one thing that I learnt about rhinos. And now I can't tell you what it was. They had something to do with their natural grazing, but of the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not, are they savannas?
Yep.
Yep. I know that they're
Of their
predominantly in the Kruger
habitat?
National Park,
Yeah.
and Mozambique and Kenya and what have you, but they do play such a vital role in grazing that if they were to go, I mean, just a single ripple effect of that would be catastrophic for the ecosystem throughout Central Africa and what have you. And so, yeah, you do kind of ask that question when you're trying to battle in your own mind, like this is devastating, but like, how bad can it be? Fucking bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was I was thinking the exact same thing when you're in that part of your documentary where the elephant was eating the top of the shrubs and how important that was, and that they made more trees than they actually took down. I mean, that's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so has in your studies have they been able to track the effects already of a massive reduction in numbers
Of the
of all of these animals that, I mean, what are we down 75% in elephants? We're down 90% in rhinos.
I think from the top of my head, and don't quote this.
No.
I think it's like 60% we've lost of all animals.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact numbers.
So what effect is so this is something that would be really interesting to know, and hopefully pushes it in the right direction. It would be interesting to see, has someone actually tracked the direct effect on us and whatever from the loss of those animals?
Yeah.
Because if they're, and not to say that they're not crucial, but so an animal that is so crucial, if it's down 50%, you would think that. And what was interesting in your documentary is the way that we'll combat it. And by the way, your narrator has a great voice.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, really, really great. That the economic strain, I mean, if you're having to pay for your crops to be pollinated instead of it just happening for free, that's huge, massive.
Yep.
What do we do now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if there is research done into it, but yeah, essentially, if any animal is taken out, and there, like you said, there's been a lot of focus on bees. So if a tiny bee is taken out, then we wouldn't be able to pollinate our plants. We would have to pay. There's ideas around it. People are saying, if we lose bees, we'll be able to have drones that pollinate plants. But then you're not going to have little things like just being able to walk down the street and smell a flower. They're going to be used for food and for crops, and that's going to then affect, of course, all your grazers and animals like that. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there is research about every single animal, what would happen. But yeah, specific key animals such as bees, devastating.
Yeah, and amphibians is another one, right? That's a huge one that they're terrified about. I thought it was really interesting about just going back to what we were saying before about sort of just laying out for your audience the ripple effect of losing the lion, and then an increase here, which means a decrease there, and then overall then they run out and then they're all fucked. And you've got a sort of situation coming about where we step into, what do they call, is it called blight? Like in Interstellar, which is what's happened. Everything's fucking dead, and now it's just a dust bowl everywhere and you can't grow anything, and then it's game over. So, and I don't know how you would think by now with the quantity of well-made, informative documentaries that really cut to the core, and the amount of people trying to elicit change, that we would be somehow in a better position. I know that we are in certain areas. I remember years ago, actually, when I first moved to Canada back in 2004, I was buying secondhand snow boots at a jumble sale, I think they call it, when it's at like a church. Anyways, there was a whole bunch of old National Geographics, and they were like from the 70s and 80s. And so I was reading through these, and a lot of them had predictions about, excuse me, like numbers of animals left. And a lot of them, a lot of the animals, it was kind of reassuring to see that were still alive that they had said in the 80s would have been dead already. So that's good, I guess. You know, like Siberian tigers, they've have long since said that they would be gone for sure. And rhinos, you know, like rhinos got really close to the brink and then we brought them back and now we're going to fuck them over. And this whole COVID-19 thing, I'm sure you're connected to what's happening out there now, that it's just
Getting
gone
worse.
gangbusters again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the core issue out of everything, we can get really overwhelmed and there's all these documentaries coming out and, you know, 1 minute there's a protest about one thing and then the next there's something else, and it's very easy to kind of just go, this is too much for me, just switch off. I think just the biggest thing that we need to look at overall is just human growth. Like we're just growing, if you just look at it in a way that we're just growing too big to handle everything. The more humans there are, you know, the more, the bigger our economy,
the greater the strain.
Yeah, we're going to need more resources and we're going to take up more land, and that's where our environment is going to suffer. So I think that's really the key thing when you get really overwhelmed and think, oh, well, I need to recycle and I need to do this, I need that. I think what we really need to be talking about to our governments is there's
Stop
too
having
many
babies.
people. But it's not that simple as we saw in
that simple.
China.
Yeah,
So,
it's crazy.
yeah, but that's, I think, is the biggest issue. We're just getting, there's too many of us.
And there's no answer to that.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah, like you said, just look what happened in China.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know what actually happened. I know that it backfired. What ended up happening?
Yeah, I don't know too much about the situation, and I'm not going to kind of pretend
That's all right. We can full disclaimer. We don't know what the fuck we're talking about.
Yeah.
But once upon a time, how old are you?
25.
25.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I remember when it came up, and I think I was in primary school when it was, and we were talking about what did they call it?
The one-child policy.
The one-child policy. And everyone thought, brilliant idea. India, you should fucking do this too. And it was only recently that I learned that it wasn't still a thing, and it wasn't a thing because it was favoring one side or something just naturally, or but it was a fuck up. You can't stunt natural growth of anything, seemingly. But is our growth natural?
You're taking away human rights. There was a lot of like, I wish I had the name for you, but I saw a documentary and it was just heartbreaking about it. And it really took you into the insight into what it was like living with the one-child policy, and it was just awful. You're taking away people's rights to have a family and to have babies, and, you know, there's different, every culture is different. So some people prefer to have girls over boys, so then they would, you know, murder one sex to get the other.
Fucked,
and yeah, so there was a lot of issues. So I'm not saying that's the answer.
No.
But I think it's just our growth is a conversation that we need to have.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's unfortunate that, of course, human rights are absolutely important. I mean, it's mandatory, but they are also the thing that fucks us the most. You know, it's human emotion, and but I want this, and you can't tell me I can't have this because it's not really that wrong. But the thing that you want is ultimately going to kill us all. Like, this is the thing that I think people need to understand too, is that the earth is going to be here a long time after us, you know, and when we wipe ourselves out or leave, it will just regenerate and a whole new other thing will happen.
Yeah.
That's, of course, unless you believe we're in a simulation and it's really just a whole bunch of ones and zeros and we're all in pods somewhere.
Yeah. That's essentially like the title of my film, The Last Extinction. So we're enduring our sixth extinction at the moment. So the last one that everyone remembers is the extinction of the dinosaurs. I titled it The Last Extinction because it's our human beings' last extinction. If we lose our animals, then we're going to lose us as well.
Yeah, fuck. Yeah, we can only survive so long, but I guess that will be the thing that curbs human growth is the loss of a food source and the loss of a place to grow it. That will be the thing that slows us right down, but then it's too fucking late, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine because we're all in a simulation anyway, so.
Yeah, let's just have at it. Yeah, let's just go and fuck shit up. Well, if you're a Joe Rogan listener, you would have caught a lot of those conversations about whether we are or not, and Elon Musk seems to think that it's likely, and I'm inclined to believe what Elon believes.
Yeah.
At least he's like. There's a lot of people can say all they want about Elon, and you've got your people like David Icke, who has, I don't know if you know who David Icke is, but do you listen to London Real?
No.
You would like it. You would really, really like it. Brian Rose was one of Joe Rogan's first guests back in the day. Now he's got a massively successful podcast and a business coaching school in London.
Mm.
But he's had a guy on his podcast recently, a couple of times, maybe 4 times now, who's been a very successful conspiracy theorist who's been talking about COVID for 30 years. He wrote about it in the 90s, telling this is exactly what will happen. And when a worldwide pandemic hits, this is how the big money will play it to knock out small businesses and the elderly, and to redirect everyone to franchises and corporations. He wrote about this in the 90s. That's exactly what's happening now. But anyways, what the fuck was I talking about?
Conspiracy theory?
I was talking about Elon, and then I went talking about Joe
London
Rogan.
Real.
Then I went on to London Real, conspiracy theories.
Never mind.
Damn it.
Yeah.
It'll come back later on the track.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, I can't remember what my run was. You see, you hear this in podcasts all the time too, don't you? Like, I was just listening to Joe Rogan talking to Kyle Dunnigan, and he was talking about auditioning for a big film back in the 90s or something like that. And then Joe Rogan cut him off on another train of thought. And I was like, I want to know how the audition went. Fuck.
Joe Rogan does that, hey.
He does it, yeah. Especially when he's baked and they got drinks in. He just goes, brah, brah, brah.
Yeah. Very frustrating.
What was... God damn it. It'll come back to me. Anyways, so you've got... So you raised all the money for the film yourself.
Mm.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not like you're just going down the street and getting some buddies together and filming something in a cafe. You're out there. Wow. How did you do that?
I run my own production business. So we film a lot of commercials and just promotional videos. So I just raised it through my own cash. And
I'm surprised we've never crossed paths before, actually.
yeah, I'm surprised as well.
Crazy.
We know a lot of mutual people.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, Scotland picked me up from the airport when I arrived in South Africa. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it is a
awesome.
small world. Yeah. But yeah, and then I head over there, and it was just great to work with Africa Media, because there was a bunch of other filmmakers who were in the program, and we were all shooting out there for, like I said, about 9 days. But we were all able to exchange each other's footage. So if there was something that we missed, because we would go out in different safari vehicles, and I'd be like, oh, I need to shoot more lions because I don't have enough footage of that. Whereas other people would shoot the elephants, and then if the elephants did something really cool, we'd be able to swap footage.
Okay.
So that was really great, and just being able to run it by a lot of people. From the filmmakers came from all over the planet, so it was great to have different people's opinions, not just an Australian opinion or a South African opinion on the film.
I think that's really important. Scotness and I talked about this at length, about collaboration, and you might remember the part from where I'm pitching him on the film. And I said to him, one of my friends helped me redirect in the writing about the last thing the world needs is another white person trying to save Africa. And he was like, so glad you said that.
Yeah.
And I loved him for that, like the directness of that. But at the same time, it's not a localized issue, as you've actually already said, because if these animals die, it affects us all. So you do need the on the ground. I've lived here my whole life. I'm connected to the earth here, like that. Absolutely, you need that. But if old mate from the other side of the planet can come through and be the final missing piece that gets it done, then it's done. It's got to happen. You need that. So that's really, really great that was structured like that.
So yeah, even though it seemed like, that I shot the film myself and I edit myself and everything, there was a lot of collaboration involved. Yeah.
Awesome. And who's your narrator? How did you?
It's George Kokina's the mentor. Right. Yeah. So
Okay.
This is his first narration, but he did a lot of fill-in narration. So he would do the draft before they've got the voice actor in. So he knew what he was doing.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, this is great because I haven't actually, this is to actually sit down and talk with someone who's been out there doing something that I'm very heavily interested in and want to try and help in any kind of way that in any way that I can. And so now you've got, is it Tuesday? How did that all pan out? You wasn't sure if it was going to happen?
Yeah, so put the film into a bunch of festivals, and obviously because of COVID, a lot of the festivals were either cancelled or postponed. But Melbourne Doc Fest decided that they would do an online advanced screening. So yeah, the online advanced screening is Tuesday the 30th of June, and you can just watch it online. It's Melbourne Doc's short number 1. So there's a bunch of other shorts in the segment.
Right.
And then they're going to be doing the cinema screening at the end of the year, but it just depends on
It does depend,
COVID.
yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. We had a film that was in its last run, and it was the most special of the screenings because they had the musicians who did the score who were going to be at the front of the cinema. It's for the Ned Kelly film that I did, and it was a sellout, and it was ready to go, and I don't know if they'll ever pull that one off again. I want to continue on, but I remembered my train of thought. We were talking about Elon Musk, and I said, say what you want about him. And I was saying that the guy, this David Icke fella, thinks that he's the fucking devil. That all, he's part of this 1% and what have you. But whatever you want to say, David, at the same time, he's one of the only few people who's, his ideas for obviously the electric car business and giving away the patents for free and coming out to South Australia and building that massive battery power plant and underground highways in LA that will reduce. He gets my vote. So what now? Like you've got the screenings and what have you, but will you, like, is there a next, is this a proof of concept? Do you want to go and make another one that expands even more? Because it's 19 minutes, right? There's a hell of a lot more to say.
Yeah.
What's your plan?
I've got a lot of sort of social activism documentaries that I'm working on at the moment. This one in particular, I'd love to see it as a feature. I'd love to have the budget and the funding to be able to talk to a lot of scientists, particularly about what our solutions are, because we don't cover that in the film. The film is essentially, just so that people don't get too turned off, it is more of a, come for the safari, stay for the education kind of thing.
Yeah. No, but that's great.
It's fun. It's not too, scary.
No, it's really educational in an empowering kind of way, not in a devastating kind of way. And I think that's a great place to start, because then you've built that audience and then you can nurse them into something that's a little heavier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'd be cool if to expand the film, but it just depends on how it goes through the festival circuit and where we take it from there. I shot another documentary in South Africa about the recyclers. I don't know if you've heard about them.
No.
Essentially, and this idea was actually, I was like my friend Paul, he lives in South Africa, and he pointed them out. He was kind of taking me around, him and his wife, and showing me around South Africa. And he showed me these guys who are kind of like riding on trolleys, and essentially they are recycling. They're taking everybody's recyclable materials and recycling them. So they're kind of eco warriors in a way. They're really at the bottom of the economy, and they're doing one of the most important jobs for our environment. So we shot a documentary about that. It was, mainly Paul's documentary, being South African. It's a very South African story, but I helped him shoot it, and we're working on the edit at the moment. So that'll be the next focus while this one's doing the circuit. Yeah.
What a great way to, and I'm looking at this in a dispassionate kind of business way, but what a great way to maximize your trip out there too, right? Like you're nailing two sides of the coin, and that's awesome, so that your coverage and your effect or what you might be able to move along is much greater. That's really, really cool. And that must have been, well, I mean, that would have taken you half the time to shoot, would it?
Yeah, that one was really quick. Like we
Yeah.
were just, essentially, actually Scott connected us. Scott again, thanks.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of running ideas by each other. And I was like, look, I've got all my gear here. Let's shoot something. And he was like, this is a passion project that he had always wanted to work on. So we were like, let's just do it. And we just kind of like drove around and shot it over the course of, I think, 2 days. And
So good. So good. I think this is what I've found sometimes to be missing, and certainly what I have really strived to to meet the right people here in Melbourne, because I'm not from Melbourne, is just that let's just get it done kind of attitude. Like, we've got a camera, I know a guy with a mic, let's just fucking do it. You know what I mean? Instead of like, well, we need to hire this and we need to hire that and it's going to take time. Does it really need to? You know, what about if we all just, take a couple of days off and go and do this fucking thing? I have just, in the last month, put together that team. And we're about to make a web series, which we just met together last night and presented all of our ideas and now have a lock on how we're going to do it. And between all of us, we could do this for free, and it will be great. Yeah, there's no reason why we can't do that. Like a lot of the training videos or educational acting videos that I listened to when I first started were just go out and make something with your friends. And I was like, where are those fucking friends? Everyone yes, we all should get paid. I get it. But at the same time, it sure beats sitting around doing nothing, because this is all, you've done this all off. No one paid you to go out there and do this.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go and do this thing. And that's what you've got to do. It's not like it was, I have a massive beef with a former agent of mine who was giving me shit for rescheduling commercial auditions. She's like, my day, people would fucking sleep on couches and they would kill to be at an audition. I'm like, dude, I got a kid on the way and I've got rent and I live in Melbourne and it's crazy expensive, and you want me to drop jobs to go to a TVC commercial? It's not like that anymore. It just isn't. So we need to all evolve. And I think that's really, really cool that you've gone out and done that. It looks incredible. And for someone who's like pretty on the pulse with what's happening, because I've always been an animal guy. I think when you were talking before about an oversaturation of causes and what, protest here and donations here and campaign here, which one do I fucking... For me, it's always been, and as heartless as this sounds, I haven't ever really invested in human causes. For me, it's always been about animals. My mum, she's the opposite. She's been in East Timor for 15 years, and she was awarded the Medal of Honor of Australia for her work with children and what have you out there. So her and I are polar opposites like that. And I've always had that tricky conversation with her about what we were talking about before, in terms of population control and what have you. And she didn't like that conversation too much, but I think it's really, really great. So what I was going to say is, so someone who has a reasonable sort of pool of knowledge. I was very educated by your documentary, so thank you for that. It's great. It's really, really great, and I hope that you can expand that, because it needs to be.
Thank you.
I think 100%. And so if you do, let's play out that perfect. What's the perfect scenario? Who talks to you in your manifestation of getting this made into a future, and how does it get done?
Yeah. I just really want to see the reception through the festivals and see how it goes. And I've already got a lot of really great feedback on developing it more.
Well, let's role play a scenario here. I'm a producer for Netflix, and I go, that documentary of yours is fucking okay. I love it. I want to expand it. 2 hours. What have you got? What do you want to talk about? How are you going to expand it? Have you got a sort of treatment for that? Like, do you know how you would go back and do it?
Like I said earlier, I just thought it would benefit a lot from, we present some of the issues in the documentary and to just be looking into different solutions for those issues. So speaking about, how maybe we could change our economy to be
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
better suit our environment, or how we can talk about, climate change and making more space for habitats. And
Do you have that kind of do you have an understanding? Have you already sort of met or spoken to people who do have a strategy for that sort of thing?
No.
Because that is the hard one, right? Like you do.
It is.
I remember watching, is it called Home? Came out like 10 years ago. Do you know the one I'm talking about? I think it was narrated by older American actress.
Here we go with the names.
Fucking hell. And she's a big one. She was the Dalmatians
Anyway.
actress. You know who I'm talking about, right?
No.
Nah. She was in that film recently where she played a writer, and her husband took all the credit for her writing. The fuck is this? It's not Gwen something. It'll come to me. Everyone will know who I'm talking about.
Okay.
She's an Oscar-winning actress. Anyways, She narrates it, and I'm watching this whole film, and it's about overuse of water and pesticides and all this kind of stuff, and you've got all this aerial imagery, and I was like, this is really, really great. I'm being informed, but most documentaries get to the end and they're like, we just need to do something. But this, and I can't tell you what it was, but this documentary got to the end and said, and this is how we turn it around. And I thought, fucking yes, this is what needs to happen more is you get to the end of these things and you're like, but what can I do, Remember in the 80s and the early 90s, it was like, just stop using aerosol cans. Well, okay, but what else? What can I really do? But that's the other thing is, for me, I want to feel like I can actually do something other than put 10 cents in a coin or what have you. And when I first became a photographer, I applied to lots of places to go and work for free taking photos, and not a single one ever got back to me. Not to say that's just how it is, but it's like, I want to be on the ground. I want to try and help too. That's a tough one as well. I appreciate. Yeah.
Well, that's the issue is that I think there's a lot of pressure that's been put on us as individuals, as consumers. You're a bad person if you eat meat, or you're a bad person if you don't recycle, or you use too much plastic.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the people who could make the difference are our governments, the people in power, but also the billionaires in the world. Like
the 1%.
Yeah, those people have it in there. It is like, if they just use 5% of their wealth, they could, I think it's the guy who runs Amazon.
Oh, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. It's something like if he uses, again, don't quote my statistics, but if he uses 6% of his wealth, he could cure all of the malaria that is killing millions of children around the world. And and you watch different documentaries, or you think about the way you vote and things like that, and you just kind of think, you go to a coffee shop and you think, what coffee cup am I going to use, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much pressure put on us as individuals, and it can be really overwhelming. But it's really the people who have more power than the individual who could make the biggest difference.
Should. Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah, or even if they have leverage over, massive corporations that they're in business with, to just say, look, if you don't remove all plastics from your thing, you're going to lose the contract. It could be that simple, where they don't actually have to spend anything. Just the threat of that other company losing $1 billion. Okay, we get rid of the plastic, but unfortunately, I maybe I'm talking out of turn here, but I would say the vast majority of those super, super wealthy people aren't the nicest of cats and couldn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? They've got a very sort of inward approach. I mean, your Rockefellers and Rothschilds of the world and what have you, or your oil magnates and what have you, they don't give a shit about the environment.
Yeah, it's a complicated subject.
It's a super
you can't just kind of generalize and be like, no one gives a shit. But
No. But at the same time, they could do so much more. Why don't they?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And surely it can't be because, it's going to cost me a couple $100 million. Well, you're worth $10 billion. It's got, well, do you know what I mean? There has to be I would imagine, if it's easy enough financially for them to elicit massive change, why don't they? That's got to be an emotional one somewhere, because then that comes back to my human rights and this. I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was about nutrition. But the podcast host Dax Shepard, do you listen to Dax Shepard's podcast? It's an acting podcast, but he was saying you're trying to work out some kind of standardized system on one of the most complicated, variable, rich entities, and that's us. Every single person has their own little different tweak, and there's billions of us. You can't. It's just a fucking minefield. So.
Yeah.
And that is that daunting side of what you're talking about.
So that's why I'm, don't even know where to start when you say to me, what would you see your film developing to? Because it's just, there's so much and I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And so, it would be great to be able to have enough funding to be able to talk to a lot of people who are in the top of their areas, like scientists and researchers, who would be able to have some options of answers.
Yes.
Possible answers.
So then
you could just keep expanding. Like you start with, talking about biodiversity, but then you can and then it quickly leads into the economy and our governments and
make a series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be epic? Like a 10-part series where you went to every major ecosystem on the planet and talked to their local government about how they treat their, it would be very interesting to talk. I'm sure there's already been people talk to him about, but the people who not run around is the wrong word, who are contracted to protect rainforests in the Amazon, and will arrest you and even go into gun battle with people who are poaching trees, essentially, like culling extra crop. Areas for crops out of rainforests that they're not allowed to, like they monitor that shit like crazy, which is great. It kind of, and then there's that question of how far do you go to protect something that you said in your film, and so did Scottness, that we now believe we're separate from, which is probably what we need to learn more than anything else, is that we are, because it has been painted that we are this separate thing and that we're, the extremists on the environmental side might say that we are, the virus of the planet and the thing that's killing it the most. And that's not incorrect. But if we reconnected ourselves with everything else around us, that is the inroad to looking at it differently, I would say. I feel like that's what you subscribe to the same notion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's essentially what my film's about. When you get to the crux of it, it's all about just reconnecting with nature, and you go on these journeys with the different animals, and it's just an insight into their lives and how we can relate to them.
That's a hard one, hey, right? Like, how do we? I remember listening to this thing years ago, and it was so random because I never listened to the radio, and I was young when I listened to it. But the only reason I tuned in was because I had just been to New York for the first time. I was 19, and the interview was like ABC radio. I think I was on the road somewhere with my dad, and he was listening to this. And for whatever reason, the former police commissioner from New York in the 90s was talking to an Australian ABC channel, and they were talking about the cleanup and the transformation of the city under Giuliani, and he said, I'll give you an example of how we were able to attack it and make this great change from the ground up. And that was to arrest everybody for any kind of infringement. And that seems harsh, but he said, people, it had become a game to not pay for the subway. Like it was like, let's, see how many free tickets we can get and not pay for this and dodge that. But we started arresting everyone. And when we did that, we found like drug dealers and people with warrants out them and fugitives and pedophilia and the whole thing. The ripple effect of just arresting people on the subway was massive. And so when you look at how do we create such a big change, it can be really daunting. But if we were able to just go, let's just attack this little thing, and the spread from that was huge. They were managed to wrap up heaps of unsolved cases and remove drugs from, like, it was massive. And I thought, man, that's really that's a really fascinating way, because I went there in the 90s and it's not so much anymore. It's pulled back a little bit, but it was the safest capital city in America. And when my dad was there in the 80s, it was a fucking nightmare, and he was mugged and the whole bit. And that's how they turned it around. You have to sort of start small on something that you can manage that will have a big ripple effect. Yeah.
Spot on.
Well, man.
Before we go.
Oh, go.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I just thought I had a fun story for you. Obviously, been listening to your podcast a lot, and I know you're very passionate about the rhinos. So just thought, I'd mention a little story.
Oh, please.
Yeah. The rhinos that are featured in my film had actually been poached, and it's kind of interesting. I can't tell too many details about it, but essentially they live on this big range. The area is huge, so even the guides and everything.
In the Kruger?
Not in the Kruger.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't really say where because
Gotcha,
they'll be poached again.
Yeah.
But the guides will be around all day, but they still might be an hour away from the rhinos. And so these guys, the poachers, managed to find their way found out where the rhinos were, and they just because they had all the time in the world, they came in a really secret way. They were able to slice off the horns. So they
tranked them.
There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Yep. They tranquilized them. They did it very cleanly and kind of professionally. And then they were able to keep the horns, which is terrible for the rhinos because it was very traumatizing for them. The guides were saying for a long time, a couple of months, they had to hand feed the rhinos because they were just so traumatized from the experience. The horn is such a big part of a rhino's identity. They use it to protect themselves. It's like someone, chopped off your arms or something.
Yeah.
I thought it was just really interesting the fact that, you see a lot of rhinos get
dehorned.
Yeah, but a lot of the time they die from it,
Do they?
Well,
Fuck.
that's just because the poachers, so they've got the anti-poachers who are after them. So instead of going in and kind of doing this, just kind of cutting off their horn, a lot of the time they'll kind of just hack off the rhinos' faces because for them it's get the horn, we don't care about the rhino's life. So a lot of the rhinos die from it, which is why we're seeing a lot of the rhinos' numbers dropping, but they actually don't have to die from it at all.
No.
It's still very traumatizing for the rhinos. But I just thought it'd be interesting. Those rhinos that, I do mention poaching in the film, and they had actually been poached and their horns grow back.
Yeah, they're like nails. So you're saying that the poachers actually didn't kill the rhinos?
No.
Because, see, I never heard of that. I mean, I've always known that, yes, they go in there with their little... They use fucking silencers made from shock absorbers on rifles, and they have that big axe with the steel handle, and they just hack away. But I've known for some time now that they, big dehorning procedures, but I didn't know that there was, that they paid a price for that in terms of their mental stability and what have you. I know now, and I forget her name, but she is kind of in the forefront of what they call a devaluation, where they dye the horn. And that seems to be, wow, I wonder what the trauma side of it is, but you got a bright red horn and, I wonder how effective it is, because if you're hunting a rhino at nighttime and you're a little, farmer with his kit, they do have night vision goggles now, but you still wouldn't be able to see that bright red horn. And then
But maybe if you do it enough, they get to the point where they're like, well, every rhino that we are killing,
It's just not worth it anymore.
Yeah,
I can't sell it. It's bright red. It's full of poison. I can't get the poison out.
So it discourages them altogether.
You would hope so.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of the time the reason why they're hacked off is because they're in such a hurry because the anti-poachers are on their back.
Totally.
So they just like hack the faces off when a lot of the time it's not necessary. And the guides that I was with, they were kind of having this debate, and, you know, I don't like particularly agree with it, but they were arguing that you could set up rhino farms.
Mr. Hume.
To what?
Mr. Hume, I forget his first name, but he has that massive rhino park, and he thinks that you can, like cows, grow rhinos, but it fucks up their whole
and like I
state
said,
of things.
It was really traumatizing for them as well. But the argument there is that, if you farm the rhino horns, then you decriminalize them, and therefore, like, as well as Chinese medicine, but a lot of people use them as symbols of wealth. So then if you're farming them and decriminalizing them, they become cheaper.
Less of a symbol.
Therefore, exactly, it's not really about the wealth status anymore. So interesting argument.
It's a fucking tough one.
Just putting it out. That's what the guides in the
Are they for
safari.
That?
I think they were just kind of having the debate about it, but
it's really interesting. Yeah.
The situation's just very complicated.
Yeah, It's super complicated because I would be all for it actually if it wasn't for the fact that if you put them all in a closed space, that fucks them up. They're not used to it, and you will have a dramatic effect on just their whole way of life, and then it could be just as catastrophic. So
the last thing we need to be doing is locking up any more animals than we already do.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Recently they were trying to herd, I don't know how they went, but they I want to say Botswana, but I could be wrong. The rhinos, the small population of rhinos that they have in the wild there, they were trying to round them up because the fucking poachers were just like, it was game on, and there was no way of stopping it. So they were going to try and move them out of the country into another place. I mean, fuck, it's just nuts. I think that might be where we have to close it. I can see people trying to get in the front door.
Yep, we'll let them in.
I really appreciate you coming down.
Cheers. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. And I can't wait to hear how we'll have to get you back in once you've tracked over your festival experience and see how that's played out, and I would like to hear about what you're doing next.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
See ya.